I am the man who built bigger barns. I did not always have a name worth remembering. My father worked this land before me, and his father before him, stony hillside terraces above the Sea of Galilee, where wheat and barley grew if the rains came, and starved if they didn't. I remember being a boy and watching my father's face when the sky stayed blue too long in the spring. I remember the taste of thin bread. I remember thinking, if I ever have enough, I will never be afraid again. That fear followed me into manhood, like a shadow that never lifted, even after the land began to bless me. Every year I added a field. Every year I hired another servant, bought another ox, dug another cistern. My neighbors began to greet me differently, not as one of them anymore, but as a man to be respected, perhaps a man to be a little afraid of. I told myself I had simply worked harder than they had. I did not ask, in those years, whether the increase was mine to take credit for at all. This particular year, the rains came at exactly the right time, early and soft, soaking the terraces without washing away the topsoil, and then stopped, and the sun came exactly when the grain needed it to ripen. I walked my fields in the gray hour before dawn, before the workers arrived, just to be alone with what I was seeing. The barley stood taller than I had ever known it to stand, gold heads heavy and nodding, so thick that when the wind moved through them, the whole hillside rippled like water. I bent down and rubbed a head of grain between my palms, breathed in the dusty sweetness of the husks, and felt something rise in my chest that I did not have a word for yet. By the time of harvest, I understood the feeling. It was more than joy. It was vindication. The threshing floor that summer was chaos from dawn until the stars came out, oxen dragging the threshing sledges in slow circles, dust hanging gold in the evening light, the shouts of the men tossing grain into the wind with their winnowing forks so the chaff blew away and the good kernels fell in heaps at their feet. I stood at the edge of it all with my steward, a careful man named Malkiel, who had kept my accounts for 11 years, and I watched the heaps grow until they spilled past the boundary stones we had marked that morning. "There is no room," Malkiel said finally, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "The barns are full. The old storage pits are full. We have grain sitting in the open, master, and if it rains before we can move it—" "It will not rain," I said, though I did not know that. I only knew I did not want anything to touch what I had grown. That night I could not sleep. I lay on my roof under a sky crowded with stars, listening to the dogs barking somewhere down in the village, and I began to have a conversation with myself, the kind of conversation a man has when he believes no one else is listening. "What will you do?" I asked myself, "for you have nowhere to store your crops?" It felt like a serious question. It felt, in the moment, like wisdom. I want to be honest about what was happening in me, because I think every man who has ever tasted success will recognize it. It was not merely a question of storage, it was a question of security. If I had enough grain, enough oil, enough silver banked away in jars buried beneath the floor of my own house, then nothing could touch me. Not famine, not debt, not the humiliation of my father's thin bread. I would be untouchable. I would finally be safe. I thought of my brother, 2 villages over, who had given away 1/10 of his harvest every year to the Levites and the poor at the gate, the way the law required, and often more than 1/10 when the widows came asking. I thought of him with something close to pity. He will always be a small man, I remember thinking, because he keeps giving away what could have made him great. I did not think of him with anything close to the truth, which was that he slept peacefully, and I did not. I answered my own question before the stars had shifted much in the sky. I will do this, I said aloud, and the words felt solid in my mouth, like a decree. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. The plan came to me whole, the way a good plan does, and I felt the fear in my chest finally loosen its grip for the first time since I was a boy watching my father's worried face. I would demolish the old mud-brick barns behind my house, cramped, low-roofed things my grandfather had built. And in their place, I would raise structures of good cut stone, with proper drainage, with iron-bound doors, tall enough to hold not one harvest, but several, so that even a run of bad years could not touch me. I imagined the sound of the masons' hammers. I imagined walking among towers of grain like a king walking among his soldiers. And then, I confess, my mind ran further still, the way a man's mind will run once he has given himself permission to dream of ease. I pictured myself years from now, older, gray, unhurried. No more rising before dawn to watch the fields with anxious eyes. No more counting, no more fear. I would say to my soul, I actually formed the words that night, lying under those stars, and I want you to understand I meant them with my whole heart. Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. It is a strange thing to remember your own foolishness so clearly. I was not a wicked man, or so I told myself. I had not stolen the harvest. I had not cheated a laborer of his wages, or turned a widow from my gate with cruelty, though I confess I had grown quick to look past the beggars near the city wall, quick to tell myself that charity was for men who could afford the sentiment. I had simply worked and been blessed, and now I intended to enjoy what I had earned. Where was the sin in that? I did not ask myself a single question that night about the one who sends the rain and withholds it. I did not ask who had multiplied the grains in each stalk beyond what any farmer's skill could account for. I spoke to my soul that night as though my soul belonged to me alone, as though I were both king and god of the small kingdom bounded by my own fences, and no one had a claim on anything within them. I fell asleep on that rooftop with the plan settled in my heart like a foundation stone. I remember the last thought I had before sleep took me. Tomorrow I will speak to Malkiel about the masons. I did not know it was the last night of my life. I do not remember dying the way you might imagine a man remembers pain or struggle or a long fading. I remember only this. Sometime in the deep hours, while the stars I had been watching wheeled slowly overhead, and the village slept, and even the dogs had gone quiet, a voice broke into the silence of that rooftop. Not the voice of Malkiel, not the voice of any servant, not a voice that could have come from Capernaum or Chorazin or any town of men at all. It was a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from inside the marrow of my bones and from the vault of heaven itself, and every plan I had made, every wall I had built around my fear, fell away like chaff before wind the moment I heard it. Fool, the voice said. I had never been called that in my life. Men had called me shrewd, prosperous, blessed, fortunate. No one had ever dared call me a fool because no one had ever seen what I saw of myself in that instant. Every calculation I had made, every barn I had planned, every comfortable year I had promised my own soul, suddenly small and brittle and absurd in the light of what was actually true. This night your soul is required of you, the voice said, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? I had no answer. That is the terror I want you to understand, if you can bear to stand where I stood. I, who had answers for everything, who had built an empire of grain and calculation and careful accounts, had no answer at all to the only question that had ever truly mattered. Whose would it be? Not mine. It had never, in truth, been only mine. The rain had not been mine. The sun had not been mine. The strange fertility that had made that barley grow taller than any man could remember. I had not made that happen with my own 2 hands, however much my pride had insisted otherwise. I had spent my whole life laying up treasure for a self that was, in that very hour, being taken from me. I had been rich in barns and poor, unspeakably, fatally poor, toward the God who owned the ground beneath my feet, the breath in my lungs, and the very soul I had spoken to so confidently under the stars. There was no time left to tear down anything, to build anything, to give anything away. There was no time left to become my brother, the small man at the gate who slept in peace because he had never mistaken his harvest for his own. There was only the truth arriving all at once, too late to change what I had done with the years I had been given. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions, however carefully he stores them, however tall he builds the walls around them. I tell you this now, from wherever it is that a fool's story is finally allowed to be told, so that you will not make the mistake I made. You are permitted to work. You are permitted to reap a harvest and to rejoice in it. My brother did, and it never cost him his soul. But do not speak to your own soul as though it belongs to you and answers to no one else. Do not let barns, however wide, become the measure of a life that God alone gave and God alone will require. Build what you like with your hands, but be rich toward God with your heart tonight, while you still have the years to do it. For none of us knows, when we lie down beneath the stars, whether we will be given the morning to begin again. If you have been blessed by this story, subscribe, like, and share it with a friend. I am the rich man, and this is my story. The smell of my house in the morning was cedar oil and roasting lamb fat, and I loved it the way other men love the smell of rain on dry earth. My steward woke me before the sun cleared the hills of Judea, and by the time I opened my eyes, my linen was already laid out, bleached white, soft as a whispered secret, the kind of cloth that took 3 washings in the Kidron just to keep its color. Over it went the purple, Tyrian purple, dyed from crushed sea snails hauled up from the coast, so costly that a single robe cost more than a laborer earned in a year. I did not think of that laborer often. Why would I? I had never had to. My gate was carved cedar, banded in bronze, and it opened onto a courtyard with a fig tree and a fountain that trickled day and night, a small extravagance, water running for no reason but the pleasure of the sound. Beyond that gate lay the road, dusty and rutted, worn smooth by sandals and hooves and the wheels of carts hauling grain to Jerusalem's markets. I did not walk that road often either. I had servants for that. I tell you this not to boast, though God knows boasting was the marrow of my bones back then, but so you will understand what I did not see, what I refused to see until it was far, far too late to matter. There was a man at my gate. I want to say I did not know him. That would be a comfortable lie, and I told myself comfortable lies for so many years that they wore smooth grooves into my soul, like a path worn into stone. But I knew him. His name was Lazarus. My household knew his name. My steward said it once, almost carelessly. Lazarus is at the gate again, master. And I remember waving my hand the way you wave away a fly. Deal with him, not now. I am dining. He was covered in sores, the kind that weep and never close, the kind that draw dogs the way honey draws bees, and that is precisely what came to him instead of mercy. The dogs of the street, licking his open wounds while he lay too weak, too broken, to drive them off. I heard them sometimes in the hush between courses, that low whine and shuffle at the gate. I remember once glancing toward the window and seeing a shape huddled in the shadow of my wall, and something in my chest tightened, just for a breath, before one of my guests said something clever about the wine, and I laughed, and the tightening passed, and I let it pass. I let it pass 1,000 times. He longed, they told me, to eat what fell from my table. Not delicacies, crumbs, the broken bread, the gristle, the bits my dogs would not finish. And I had table enough that such falling was constant. My feasts were not occasions. They were my daily rhythm, sumptuous every single day, as though the abundance itself were a kind of God I served without ever naming it as such. I ask myself now, in the place where I ask myself everything, with no mercy left to soften the asking, did I think I earned this? Yes. God forgive me. Yes, I did. I told myself the old story rich men tell themselves in every generation, that the harvest was blessing on my wisdom, that my father's inheritance multiplied under my own shrewd hand, that a man like Lazarus lay at gates because something in the order of the world had placed him there, and something in the order of the world had placed me here, on this side of the bronze-banded gate. And who was I to quarrel with the order of the world? I did not hate Lazarus. That would almost be easier to confess. I simply did not see him. He was furniture in the landscape of my comfort. A man can walk past suffering 1,000 times and call it prudence, call it business, call it the necessary hardening a person needs to function in a hard world, and never once call it what it is. There is a law, I had heard it read in the synagogue since I was a boy on my father's knee. You shall open your hand to the poor and needy in your land. I had heard the prophets thunder about it too, how the Lord hates a fast where men bow their heads like reeds while their neighbor starves at the gate. I heard it. I nodded at it the way you nod at a familiar song whose words you've stopped truly hearing. Moses and the prophets spoke plainly enough. I simply built my feasts louder than their voices. Then Lazarus died. I remember hearing of it the way you hear of weather in a distant province, a fact, not a wound. My steward mentioned it in passing while going over the household accounts. The beggar at the gate has died, master. I believe I asked what would be done with the body. I do not believe I asked anything else. I did not weep. I did not send so much as a coin for his burial. Scripture does not even record that a grave received him, only that the poor man died, and the angels came. Angels. For a beggar covered in sores, whom I would not have let past my threshold. Carried, not walking, not dragged, but carried tenderly the way you carry something precious to Abraham's side, to the bosom of the father of our whole nation, the place of comfort and rest promised to those who die in faith. I did not know that then. I only knew he had died, and I still had wine to drink and guests to entertain, and the fountain still trickled in my courtyard as though nothing in the universe had shifted. Then I died too. I will not linger long on how. Scripture itself does not linger. Only that death did not ask my permission, did not consult my wealth, did not pause out of respect for my purple robes. It came the way it comes for every man born of woman, rich or poor, and stripped away in a single moment everything I had spent a lifetime accumulating. My linen, my gate, my fountain, my name among men, all of it fell from me like a robe slipping from careless shoulders, and I stood, though stood is not the right word for what a soul does, before realities I had spent my whole life refusing to consider. I was buried, I am told, with honor. A man of my station would have had mourners, perhaps even hired ones, wailing at a tomb cut into rock, sealed with a stone, myrrh and spices layered over what remained. There would have been a fine service. I do not know. I was not there for it, not truly. Where I found myself was somewhere else entirely. Torment. I do not have gentler words for it, and I will not soften what I lived, what I live, for this agony has no evening to close it. I lifted my eyes in that place of fire, and here is the horror that no comfortable theology I once mouthed in the synagogue had prepared me for. I could still see. Far off, impossibly far, and yet visible, as though the very design of that place ensured I would witness it, I saw Abraham. And beside him, resting against him the way a beloved son rests, was Lazarus. Lazarus, whole, healed, his sores gone as though they had never wept a single drop, comforted in the bosom of the very Father of our faith, while I cried out. I could not help it. The cry tore itself from whatever remains of a man when the man himself has burned away. Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue. For I am in anguish in this flame. Do you understand what I was asking? I, who would not spare a crust of bread, who would not so much as glance twice at a dying man against my own gate. I was asking that same man whom I had once ignored into starvation to serve me now, to dip his finger, in water for me. The audacity of it did not strike me until the words had already left whatever was left of my mouth. Even in torment, some old reflex in me still expected the world to bend toward my comfort. That is how deep the rot goes, when a man builds his whole life on having rather than giving. It does not die with the man. It is, perhaps, the very thing that outlives him. Abraham's answer came not with cruelty, but with a terrible, settled sorrow, the sorrow of a father who cannot undo what a son has done. "Son," he said, and even in my anguish, I felt the strange ache of that word, son, spoken to me now when I had no father's house left to belong to. "Remember that you, in your lifetime, received your good things, and Lazarus, in like manner, bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. Remember, as if I could do anything else. Memory was the only possession death had not stripped from me, and it had become its own flame, hotter than the one around me. Every feast relived, every glance away from that gate replayed without mercy. Every crumb I let fall to the dogs instead of to a starving man's hand. And besides all this," Abraham continued, "between us and you a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us." Fixed, not temporary, not negotiable. I had spent a life believing that enough wealth, enough influence, enough charm at the right table could bridge any gap I encountered. There was no bridging this one. Do you understand what I felt in that moment? Every gate I had ever closed now against me, forever, by my own hand, though I had never known I was building it. And still, some flicker of what I once called love rose up in me, though I no longer know if it deserves that name. I thought of my brothers, 5 of them, still walking the earth, still reclining at tables like the one I once ruled, still stepping past gates the way I had stepped past mine. "Then I beg you, Father, send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come into this place of torment." I thought it clever. I thought, surely, a man raised from the dead would shake them the way nothing else could. Surely they would believe that. Abraham's answer undid the last of my pride. "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them." "No, Father Abraham," I said, and I confess even now the desperation in it, the last bargaining of a man who still, even here, believed he knew better than the order God had set. "But if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead." And there it was, the truth I had refused my whole life, spoken plainly at last, too late to change anything. I did not lack evidence. I had never lacked evidence. I had the law, the prophets, the poor man's face at my own gate every single day of my prosperous life. What I lacked was a heart willing to see. No miracle would have moved me, because miracles were never the thing I refused. Mercy was the thing I refused. I looked past what God had already placed before my eyes, a starving man on my own doorstep, and told myself I was simply too busy, too important, too comfortable to be bothered. I am the rich man, and this is my story. Not a warning shouted from beyond the grave to shake my brothers, for even that mercy was not granted me. It is only this, the memory of a gate I should have opened, a hand I should have filled, a man I should have called by name, while there was still time to call him anything at all. I had every chance. Moses and the prophets spoke plainly enough. I simply never let them get past my table.